That concludes my pre-talk message. This is where we actually get into what we're really talking about today, which is software update, the missing manual. No, I can't use that one. That's against the corporate terms. There's a trademark here. Discovery D2, Electric Boogaloo. Well, maybe not quite what I'm going for, but it certainly gives off a certain impression, does it not? Threat or menace. Well, maybe not quite the positive talk that I wanted to give today. A guide to safe use? Well, it's not a harmful chemical yet, so I think this is where we're going to land. We're going to land on where we're going and where we've been with software update. I want to start by talking about this question first. How do Macs update in 2023? Because this is the crux of the software update problem. And it's also the key to its solution. And so I want to point you at a couple of resources. I'm going to throw QR codes up on the screen. I promise you they are not Rickrolls yet. That's for tomorrow. So use them now. But I do want to talk about some key resources here. Apple has the Platform Deployment Guide. Who here has that site bookmarked? Who here knows that site from memory? I was going to say the Platform Deployment Guide is Apple's key documentation artifact for talking about how macOS gets installed on things, how you deploy macOS and Mac devices as well as iOS and iOS devices across your organizations, large and small. The Platform Deployment Guide is updated on the regular. There is now a page where you can go to see which pages inside the Platform Deployment Guide have been updated since you came last. That is another great bookmark, which is unfortunately not at this QR code. There is a partner guide to this, which helped me get a lot of these details out, and that is Apple also makes available the Platform Security Guide. The Platform Security Guide is for your CISO, it's for your security teams, it's for you, the admin, to understand what are the security measures that are in play on your system's day-to-day basis. Who here saw the talk this morning on the grade 8 from John? John, you should put up your hand. Okay, I mean, it's honest. Those are the kind of things that we are going to have to deal with more frequently as Mac admins in the future. Compliance and security are an intertwined story that we will not be able to escape in the next 5 years. What Eric Dreyer said, that if you have, as an IT department, are not flowing up through a CISO in the next 5 years, that would be a shock to me. I know that at Jump Cloud, we have recently moved our IT department underneath our CISO. And new policies and procedures are constantly happening on my laptop as a result. I hope the screensaver does not go on while we are giving this talk. I want to talk about a couple of key vocabulary differences because these are things that are second nature when you think about them, but how we talk about them matters a great deal. There are updates and there are upgrades. Updates take you within a single major release, 13.2.1 to 13.3, 13.1 to 13.3. All of those are updates. Apple very clearly demarcates a line between an update and an upgrade. Upgrades are major releases in the operating system. So you go from 12.3 to 13, or you go from 11.5 to 13. Those are major upgrade operations. In addition, beginning with macOS 12.3 and later, Apple has now announced the availability of over-the-air updates for macOS. This is new. You've been doing it on your iPhones for a long time. iOS 11, iOS 12 was where we started to get over-the-air updates that were complete in their entirety and were personalized based on the version you are coming from to the version you are going to. This is a great way to limit the size of the download that you are enforcing your user to do. Beginning with macOS 12.3, you could get directly to macOS 13 without having to download a 13 gigabyte application file, opening the application, hitting continue, typing your admin user credentials, and hitting install. And then it does some stuff, and then it does some more stuff, and then it restarts and it does yet more stuff. And at the conclusion of that process, you have now up to date. The mechanism that is represented by the over-the-air update mechanism no longer requires admin rights to go between major versions of the operating system. So, did anyone have a very interesting allergic reaction when you found this out for the first time? I certainly know I was like, oh, well, that's complicated. How does that change our update policy? Because for a long time, you used to be able to essentially say, hey, look, keep an eye out for the macOS install application process and, maybe kill it if I wasn't quite ready to move to Ventura yet. No longer available as of macOS 12.3. Your users are going to be prompted to install macOS Ventura because now we are 90 days after the conclusion of the introduction of macOS Ventura. And so as a result, your end users, standard or otherwise, are going to be able to install macOS Ventura all on their very own. And admin friends, I have some terrible news for you. There is very vanishingly small number of things that you can do to stop that. So one of the great things that John pointed out, he had a whole slide about it this morning. I had a slide about it yesterday. Apple is very clear that when it comes to security updates, they patch all things on the latest version of macOS. That version is macOS Ventura today. It has been since October. And so as a result, Apple is primarily fixing things in macOS Ventura. They are not necessarily fixing things in macOS Monterey. They're absolutely not fixing things in macOS Big Sur. And so if you don't have a plan to get from where you are to macOS Ventura, it is time to start reevaluating your life choices. It is time to get there. The other piece of vocabulary that I want to point you out is the Universal Mac Assistant application, or UMA. This is the traditional app-based installer. You can download this from Appleseed as well as with the IPSW firmwares for the M1, M2, M1 Pro, etc. Accoutrement of the artifacts. So the other piece that I want to talk a little bit about is like doing the updates itself. There are 3 ways that you can update macOS in effect. You can do it directly from the system settings application. And so you can see here I have a software update available. It's prompting me to install the 13.4 beta because I live on the bleeding edge. I hope that this presentation goes okay. It's beta 1 even, so who knows? I might just be risking it all for nothing. We'll find out. Another way that you can update the operating system is via MDM. Mobile device managers have a set of commands that they can deploy to an environment, to an individual device or multiple devices, which will allow them to update the operating system of a tenant system in an appropriate way. There are multiple different install actions that we'll talk about here in a minute. You can also update the operating system via terminal. And so here you can see software update -L. I can see that I have a version of macOS Ventura 13.4 beta that is available to me. It is recommended, so I mean, that's obviously an install immediately, right? I mean, it was recommended to me by Apple, so therefore I'm going to take this action as part of this process. And of course, software update space -IA will take care of that install action for me. It will require a set of user credentials and things along those lines. So we have to talk about this first step is all about downloading the operating system update that you are about to apply. You're going to get a set of bits. They're going to be held on disk until such time as your operating system is ready to be updated. So you have the bits. Now what? Beginning about 3 or 4 years ago, the update process gets a personalization routine. And this is a graphic directly from the Apple Platform Security Guide. And when I publish this talk, those links will go exactly to the right place. In this case, and you can see I even went to the Australian version. I did not want to subject you to the improper linguistic technique of the American English. So, I also couldn't get to the American English version from Australia. So that tells you a lot. In this particular case, your computer is going to send to Apple a list of measurements of the existing system. And is going to send it to that Apple authorization server as part of that process. And in response, Apple is going to send back to you, the end user computer, a list of appropriate pieces here. It's going to give you a signature for the new operating system that you are about to install. It is going to give you an anti-replay value or a number once or a nonce. I like number once better. Number once is a good one. And then last but not least, it's going to give you an ECID, which is based on your processor inside your machine. It is unique to this machine. Every operating system update now is done online, and so is going to be done with this personalization process. If you ever see the error that says, I had trouble personalizing this version of the operating system, who here has gotten that message before? You were blocking Apple traffic, weren't you? I see how that goes. So we're going to talk a quick moment here about traffic to and from Apple. This QR code takes you to knowledge base article HT210060, the Apple products on enterprise networks. I am going to give you the very quick song and dance, chapter and verse for all of these very important things. Don't attempt to inspect SSL or TLS traffic between your devices and Apple. Just don't do that. It's not for you. There is no good. If you do not trust Apple to be delivering back the content that you were expecting, I have some very terrible news for you about your current professional situation. In addition, you should not block outbound connections to Apple, period, full stop. If you have a proxy, 1, I'm sorry. 2, I know it's not your fault. 3, skip it for your Apple traffic. There are great ways to do this. This article, if you have also not bookmarked this article, bookmark this article, because this article has chapter and verse for every single Apple service. If you also are in a bad situation where all of your proxies require IP addresses instead of domain names, sharpen your resume. I'm more than happy to help with placement services. It's time to get out of where you are. You don't need to hurt yourself this way. Last but not least, content caching is fine and strongly encouraged. Who here has brought their network to a screeching halt with very large updates? I was going to say, I have done that too. I triggered 250 devices to download a 13 gig update over a 10 meg connection. We had to send everybody home that day. Not my finest hour. It does help with the getting the content caches installed. And also, I will point out that there is a content caching profile in the MDM specification now. You can create a profile that is adapted to your local network with parent support and peer support and all manner of great things. You can program it with the MDM, apply it to an individual system on your network, and poof, you have a content cache. Do this. It is great for you. It is fantastic. I also, because I'm, funny story, I'm a political science major and a vocal performance major for my undergraduate degree. My master's is in history, my master's of science is in the history of technology. So you are talking to a unlicensed historian, and we are going to take a little bit of a moment here to talk about software updates in Apple history. And so if what's past is prologue, then what we need to talk about is El Capitan. And so OS 10, 10.11, El Capitan, introduces system integrity protection. Some directories on your disk are read-only without special permissions granted only to Apple. Those are files you may not write as the admin, you may not write it as root, you may not write it period, full stop, because you, the user or the admin, does not possess the correct signing certificates and authorities to do this. Only Apple, with their signing certificates in their processes, may write those places. This is where software updates started getting very interesting very quickly. macOS 10.15, 4 years later, Catalina, creates an APFS volume group and moves the system to a read-only volume as part of that volume group. It can technically be mounted for read and write and changed, but it probably shouldn't be. I wouldn't recommend trying this. ASP's very dangerous, you go first. But there are things that you can do there. In addition, beginning with macOS 10.15, this marks the end of Reposado and catalog caching for your local network for operating system updates using third-party tools that are not caching server. So pour one out for Reposado and all of us who spent a lot of time refreshing those very massive catalogs of very large files. it was really painful when you had to dump out your cache because it meant downloading 700 gigs of stuff to hang out on your local network. My network administrator was often very cross with me if that ever had to happen. So that was a bad time. This is what we saw. We now had this volume group, and over on the left-hand side, there was a system volume where the operating system lives, and you can see it's locked, it's read-only, it's not for you, the admin, to do anything with. And you also have a data volume over here with user data and non-Apple applications. It's just a separation of those two powers. Big Sur comes the next year, and it locks down that system volume with a cryptographic seal. What does that mean? It means that on disk, every file has been checksummed and verified with local cryptography. And so essentially it's like, look, I'm just going to create all of these hashes for all of these things. And we're going to sign all of those hashes and make sure that they match. So that if I am tinkering with that partition, guess what? Your cryptographic seal is broken now because everything is different. And so if one file is different, your system boots into recovery and says, hey, we got a problem here. I need to reinstall the operating system. One file can do that. Booting is actually now accomplished by mounting a snapshot of the APFS volume. And so we get this instead, and I put the little bookmark emoji. I don't know why that's a bookmark emoji. It kind of looks like an official document emoji to me, but okay, that's neither here nor there. And so we get this particular situation here, where we have a sealed system volume and the data volume, which the user is spending their time in. It's read-write, everything is hunky-dory out there. You'll notice we've got this little dashed line around there. That dashed line generally is meant to be thought of as the boot volume. This is Macintosh HD land. If that volume is encrypted, it is protected by the system volume keys at those points. There are specific keys that unlock the sealed system volume that are slightly different than the ones that install or that unlock your data volume. So updates, right? Stay on topic, Thomas. I will do that. Okay. So here we are in an update configuration where we have a sealed system volume that makes a new snapshot because I have a new version of the operating system ready to go. I make a new snapshot. The updater in that process goes through and updates the new system volume snapshot. In that environment, all of those read-write operations are keyed against Apple's signing certificates for the processes that do those tasks. Those tasks done by that updater process are marked with a different set of Apple certificates. There is a different set of entitlements associated with those software update activities, and only those activities can be conducted by that environment. So what you have here is a very, very, very secure way to create a new version of the operating system because only Apple can sign those pieces, and they sign them at Apple. I don't know, in a special room. There's a dark ceremony. I understand there's a, they cut the head off alive. No, it's California. They're vegan. So, there's another activity that's conducted there, but it involves identity verification. The build system at Apple is something I would love to get to tour at some point because I can only imagine the amount of security that's required to access those systems, which produce those builds, which produce those updaters, which are signed with those special certificates. And of course, everything's been through that reverse hashing process where they took the old, the private keys for those things and shoved them in a blender and turned it on. There are videos of them doing that for like the iMessage service and for other things along those lines. That one-way hashing function that has been referred to a number of times really is HSMs in a blender. Thanks, it's been fun, but those are gone now. And so at the end of that process, it switches over the boot volume to a new system volume snapshot. And you now have the same operating system in the entire process. During this phase is where Apple goes through the reboot process. And so you have picked up the boot volume, made a copy of it, done a bunch of tasks on this one, and now it blesses this new piece. At no time during that software update action is your user data volume available to the system. All of those things are tied up in the user's cryptographic keys. And so when you restart, you get to the point where you've done an authenticated restart with a set of keys from the user. That's why the user needs to consent to that process. And that's what allows it to complete booting all by itself, all by its lonesome. So wait, there's more. Software update is also about the physical hardware that we have. And so here I want to talk quickly about erase all contents and setting, which is macOS 12's single best feature and probably, yep, it is fair to clap. It is probably the single best Apple innovation in the last 5 years for system admins. Might be longer than that. I'm trying to think, I mean, I'd go back all the way to FileVault 2. This is amazing. And so what it does, when you send an erase all contents and settings or perform one manually, or when you just even say, MDM, hey, go wipe that one right over there. What's it do? So again, we have the sealed system volume, we have the data volume with the user data and the non-Apple apps. Everything that is provided by Apple on initial delivery of a machine is in that sealed system volume. Anything you, the admin, or you, the end user, install on the device hangs out over here in the data volume. So what's it do? It does that. It basically picks up the data volume and says, bye, it's been fun. This is where I would have done an Anvil drop, I think. At that point, sorry, Google Slides does not have an Anvil drop. Biggest feature request I'm going to make this year. Anyway, you get to the state where when the operating system boots and there's only a sealed system volume, it's looking for that data volume and it doesn't find one. So what's it do? New data volume! Creates a new data volume as part of that volume group Macintosh HD and proceeds through the setup assistant to start over again. So this is the magic behind erase all contents and setting. That sealed system volume, still safe, still all good, still ready to go for you, but now you just get a brand new user data volume. It's what makes it easy to reprovision machines that are in this state. So we also need to talk a little bit about, with software update, about booting macOS, generally speaking here in 2023. Secure boot is the underpinning of a secure update process. And I want to talk a little bit about how this works on older Macs and how this works today on Apple Silicon Macs. Or I'm sorry, Mac computers with Apple Silicon. Sorry, I'm trying to address, you may have heard Eric Dreyer use that exact phrase. That is the Apple style guide phrase for referring to Mac computers with M1 processors. It's Mac computers with Apple Silicon. And the S in Silicon is lowercase. Anyway, the things we learned when we read style guides. So Intel Macs with T2 chips, and again, these are machines that are now 5 years old, give or take. I'm not going to talk about Intel Macs that don't have a coprocessor. Forgive me, this talk is short. And I didn't want to cover that because also, one, it would scare me. And it's a little frightening that that's how we got by. Regardless, the T2 is actually what boots first when you hit the little square button in the upper right-hand corner of an older MacBook Pro. That T2 chip is a whole computer of its very own. And so it validates the boot ROM at that time. It validates the bootloader that's present on the device. It validates that kernel cache signature that's on file within the secure enclave of that T2 device. It also validates the UEFI signature on file and then loads EFI at the conclusion of that process. If any one of these 5 things fail, you get booted into recovery mode because you have a system that can no longer trust itself. Because one of those pieces doesn't match based on the secure enclave data that's kept. And so each one of these things is a security measure that protects your operating system. And that protection is what gives you the flexibility to trust what you have. So if we think about it from this perspective, the T2 is kind of like a little iPhone that lives inside your Mac and handles all of these industry-leading security techniques at that time. And so once you have loaded EFI, that is where the traditional Mac operating system kind of takes over. The Intel chip boots up next. It evaluates the boot.efi statement out of the T2 processor, and then the boot.efi process reviews the macOS signature on disk and decides whether or not it will continue to boot macOS. And so this is also the state where Apple Configurator 2 comes in handy, because every once in a while, you get into a state where something went wrong during a Bridge OS update. And this is what Revive fixes. Revive covers here. And then everything else is delivered south of that in the Intel Core chip. So Bridge OS updates, T2 processors, upgrade like other Apple Silicon devices through communication with Apple, but occasionally problems occur with those updates, and Apple Configurator 2 is valuable for reviving these devices in the event that something goes wrong that is recoverable. The T2 chip also contains the primary locking mechanism for the volume encryption keys for the disk that's associated with that. If Bridge OS packs it in, I hope you had backup, or at least that you could restore. You might have had backup. If you can't restore, that's a different problem. In those cases, you may need to restore the firmware to the Bridge OS device, and that will reset the storage on the device. The storage is hardwired into the T2 for direct access to those volume encryption keys. And so those are the pieces that your end user passwords unlock access to. So Macs with Apple Silicon are very different. And this diagram is also from the Apple Platform Security Guide. And to my detriment, I could not make it better than this. This is where we start. Local policy is one of those oft misunderstood things that have been brought into sharp relief in the last 3 months. Who here upgraded from like 13.1 to 13.2 or 13.2.1 and had a machine go into recovery mode? That's too many hands, y'all. We've had a rough go, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. This is the process for handling the boot of a Mac computer with Apple Silicon. The boot ROM validates the low-level bootloader signature, which in turn validates system-paired firmware signatures, and then we get to the local policy signature. Think of the local policy signature like the master boot instructions for your system. In this particular case, it takes a local policy file that is stored in the secure enclave, and it combines it with the number once. The cryptographic concept of randomness applies here. So essentially, every time there's an operating system update, it writes a number once into the secure enclave. That number is then validated to make sure that it validates the hash. And so that signature process is what gets you past all of this. It covers the personalization process. All of this action here is the result of the pre-work that we were talking about with the authorization to do the update. As part of that process, you also get to the stage 2 signature, which takes into account all of the other pieces that were associated with the operating system that were measured and sent back to Apple during the upgrade process. And at the conclusion of all of that, if everything went okay and the security mode was honored and the local policy was in good shape, and if you were using kernel extensions, 1, what's wrong with you? 2, but we get to a state where the auxiliary kernel collection is present and has been validated as part of that process. If you are operating in reduced security mode and you have installed kernel extensions, again, we talked about this. Stop hurting yourself, my friends. If you are doing that task and you are in a lower security mode, those auxiliary kernel collections are also hashed and sent to Apple, and you get a new number once as part of that process. So you get to the end of this entire adventure with the local policy, and then you can boot macOS at the end. Okay, we've talked about how systems update. We've talked about how systems can be booted. We talked a little bit about the other things. And now we get to managing software versions and other lies that we tell ourselves. In this case, we have to think about a couple of requirements. Is anybody out there not using a mobile device manager? It's okay, this is a safe space, and it's fine, we have counselors standing by. In this case, you need an MDM in order to do anything interesting. And by interesting, I mean delay versions of the operating system, minor updates, or major upgrades. And you probably need something more than an MDM. I would love it, nothing further than to say that someone out there has figured out software update in such a way that you need just one thing. All due respect to the folks at JumpCloud and the folks at chnage and the folks at Jamf and the folks at Mosel and the folks at VMware and the folks at, nobody's doing this right yet. We're not there. Nobody in the industry is doing this right yet because we can't. We'll talk about that in a second. So how do MDM updates work? Like this. So we get an MDM on the right and an MDM managed Mac on the left. The MDM tells the device, hey, please do a scan for updates. Okay, that sounds like fun. When you tell it do a scan, you now have to wait for that scan to happen. Scans are not instantaneous. Scans are done best effort by the operating system. When we implemented this at JumpCloud as part of the process, we did a lot of measuring. How long does it take before there's a result back that we can actually go and interrogate? Who here thinks that that value is less than 15 minutes? Less than 30 minutes? Less than an hour? Less than 6 hours? 95% return an answer in the first 30 minutes. The other 5%, sometimes you get an answer back and sometimes you don't. It's not a great feeling, kids. This is not a good time. But at the end of that conclusion, your MDM ought to be able to ask the device, what updates do you, system, have available to you? The system will respond with an array of available updates that work on that board. That array includes every update available to them, not every update that you, the admin, have determined that they may install. You get back an array of everything it can possibly do, because MDMs don't have to listen to the rules when it comes to delay cycles. This is awesome, because it means you can have a 30-day delay in place for minor or major versions of the operating system and still send your devices a command to install the latest update or the latest beta or any number of things to those individual devices. Whether or not they answer, totally different story, we'll get there. You can now tell the device, please install this specific update delivered by a product key or a product version, and install it using the following verb. And then the system will say, yeah, okay, whatever, and we go off on our way. We'll talk a little bit more about the whatever part of that cycle because it's the sharp edges and the corner cases that admins need to deal with. There are 6 commands that you can send, install methodologies that you can send to a device. You can sell it, download this update only, and then just keep it on disk and we can install it at a future time. This is a great way to essentially work in low bandwidth environments like Australia, where you can send a command, hey, do this update. It might take a day or two to get you all the bits that you need to get. And then at the conclusion of that process, you can also send an install command. You can say notify only. Who here uses notify only? Not a single hand. How about that? Notify only just tells the user, hey, you got an update. You want to do that update? Turns the little red icon on the system preferences or system settings application. That's all it does. You have a default behavior, which is effectively download this update and present it to the user for install at the conclusion of that process. Default is used when you don't send any other command. Default is fine. It still requires user participation. Here is where we get to the 3 really interesting ones. Install ASAP. Download the update, prepare the update, tell the user that they have 60 seconds to stop what they're doing, save all their work because there's an update about to happen. Okay. Maybe not the most user-friendly behavior, but it's certainly not user hostile like install force restart, which is sudo software update -ia now, which is essentially download the update to the system. It does tell the user, hey, your system administrator has sent an update to your system. It's about to happen. Get yourself ready. Make peace with your God, and off you go. The install force restart at the conclusion of that process restarts the operating system and begins the software update process. It is not polite. You have no control over when, because you have no control over the user's bandwidth link to Apple and how close they are to a CDN. It could happen 5 minutes from now. It could happen 5 hours from now. I hope you have told your user what's about to happen, because Apple is not gonna. And then there's install later. Install later is released with macOS 11 and essentially says, hey, download this update, prepare it, and then tonight, when they're not doing much on the system, hopefully, try and install that update, please. Install later is actually a good experience for your end user. However, it is escapable. Prior to macOS 12, it was, a best effort attempt at trying to do this. It's not very successful. I would say 40% or less in macOS 12 and below. macOS 13 does make this better, and macOS 12 also introduces the concept of deferrals. So this is the section of the Apple deployment, the developer documentation for MDM, and it says you may send the Max users deferrals key as part of your install command. And it says it's the maximum number of times the system allows the user to postpone an update before it's installed. The system prompts the user once a day. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the language that Apple put into the platform deployment guide about supporting your different versions. They don't make it exactly very clear here, do they? They're using, I'm not going to use the phrase weasel words because that is a judging phrase. I am going to use the words more along the lines of they are not speaking precisely because they cannot. Your system keeps track of when you use it and when you don't. That utilization pattern is used for a number of things. Charging the battery properly. If you sit at a desk all day and it's all plugged into your network and it's plugged into a power adapter all the time, your system knows this and it tracks that. And it maybe stops charging your battery to 100%. And, to keep the machine in good health. And so the system prompts the user once a day to do that install. My experience with my usage pattern, which is I sit down at my desk between 7 and 7:30, I get up for lunch, I get up for dinner, I come back at the end of the day, wrap up things, and I'm usually done by 8. In those cases, when I get a Max user, or when I get a deferral released install later command, I usually see that update probably around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But if I was a shift worker and I was working the overnight shift, that update would come at a different time. The system determines when you get prompted, and the system determines when your update happens. You, as the admin with an install later command, have no control. And may I suggest that you just be comfortable with that, because there is no way for you to change that at this time. And that's okay. We talked a little bit about compensating controls this morning. And John's talked about like, hey, this is what we've done to deal with this, and this is what we've put into place. And it's okay to live with a little bit of uncertainty as an admin, even if it feels antithetical to the control that we wish to wield on behalf of our employer. So install later updates usually happen during a system quiet period. And that is traditionally 1 to 5 a.m. local time, but it is actually influenced by the end user's activity, and it requires a power adapter connected or a battery above 50%. There's something else that we got to talk about here, and that's bootstrap tokens. I had not noticed, by the way, you can see this. The coin here, it's about the size and shape of an American quarter. And it says up top, it says the crazy ones, which I kind of appreciate. I kind of dig that. That was pretty sweet. So bootstrap tokens. A bootstrap token is a file vault unlock key that works on the system volume within the hardware, the volume group that represents the Macintosh HD volume group. And so here you can see, if you do disk-util apfs list users / you can see I've got a personal recovery user and I've got an MDM bootstrap token external key. That bootstrap token is a file vault unlock recovery key in shape and size that is escrowed to your MDM. And that your device can go and grab if it needs it. And so essentially when you say install a new version of the operating system, the system says, okay, cool, I'm gonna need a bootstrap token for this. And so it goes and grabs that from the MDM through a special interface that happens as part of that process. And it's used by install later to unlock the system during the quiet period. So the system is asleep, the system is in a secured mode, it is protected by a user password. The bootstrap token is an unlock code for the secured sealed system volume at that time. And so that's why it's incredibly important that you use an MDM with bootstrap tokens involved. Not every MDM is. Most of the commercial ones are, thank whatever power that be. But that's why you need this as part of your MDM update. So we've talked a little bit about uncertainty here. We've talked about why install later is not the best thing since sliced bread. We've talked about the escapability of MDM updates. We've certainly talked about, well, I guess we really haven't talked about getting your users to do the update task for you. Because that is the other way to get this done. Patch management can be a human process too. Or we can use some of these coping mechanisms. I'm going to talk first about Nudge. You can see the QR code will take you to the GitHub page as well as to the wiki for this solution. Who here is using Nudge today? Many hands go up. Who here has used Nudge before? Most of the hands go up. Eric Gomez from Uber helped develop Nudge with the community writ large because they had a problem. They wanted to do software updates when we started to get into the Catalina Big Sur world where Monkey could no longer do them for us. We could no longer download the package from our Monkey restore, or excuse me, from our Monkey store and then apply it like an operating system package, which is how we used to do it in the bad old days. And so Nudge is a launch daemon as well as a configuration profile or a JSON object. It drives users to apply their own updates, and it drives them by telling them how long they have until they must update. It provides an increasingly powerful cadence that is controllable that will help you get to that point. It can take over the screen. It can be customized easily. It's supported by a Jamf Pro schema, which I think is really, really cool. And I love that that's an extension that they've made to their product that helps power the community tool that we have. It's also used by JumpCloud's MDM as part of our patch management SKU. In addition, there's great community support for this, but what you can do at that point is deterministically set what target OS you want to go to, how soon you want to get there, and what you have to do to get there. So if you're not using Nudge to do your updates, look at it. It's a good way to get around some of the challenges that we face by driving the human solution to this technical problem, because not every technical problem needs a technical solution. Who here's seen the XKCD solution about a $5 wrench? If you don't understand what I'm talking about, Google $5 wrench and you will have a good laugh. I also want to talk about Super, which is another way of doing this through MDM commands and Jamf APIs. And so Super is a combination of scripts and the IBM notifier framework. And it does require API access for Jamf Pro, but you can, because the Jamf Pro API tokens are so scopable, you can make this safe to deploy. And so at that point, he's also, Kevin White is the person behind this product and has an open GitHub repo for this project. It combines notifications with API commands for schedule OS update, which is a great way to get to the bottom of the solution. Last but not least, I want to talk about doing updates with the software update CLI. And basically, don't do this. Please, for the love of God, find any other way. But if you have to, there's some stuff that you need to know. As of macOS 13.3, really a macOS 13, it is not a good idea to use the sudo launchctl kickstart-k system/com.apple.softwareupdate-d construct anymore. Who here has seen a machine where it's running 13.1, should see 13.2.1 or 13.3, and the system says, everything's great? Yeah, we've all seen that one. That one's not a fun story because you usually need to tell the user to restart or kickstart their software update D process. That's not great. Apple says, as of the beta, or it's the Apple seed notes for a previous release of the operating system, don't do this. Please stop touching the penguin. So In addition, it is very important for you to know that if you're going to use the software update CLI, authenticated restarts will require a volume owner's credentials. And they require that you specify them in the command line prompt. Who here thinks sending passwords over even a secured channel in plain text is a very bad idea? It's a bad idea. Don't do that. So how do we make this better? This slide is from yesterday, and so is this one. We need to give Apple better feedback on why this process is not fun for us, the admins. We want nothing more than what Apple wants. I want an operating system that will update clearly, cleanly, and without too much trouble. And I want it done in such a way that I, the admin, have some control over what happens there. So if we think about suggested topic areas, I want folks to file feedback. If you haven't already, feedback is not, it is not a ghost town. Feedback is not like shouting into the void. It is not like the bagel in Everything Everywhere All at Once. You are not shouting into nothingness. Please, for the love, do some stuff here. So these are 4 great topic areas that I think that folks should file feedback on. If you need guidance or help, I'm available at lunch or at the drinks after this or over the weekend. So if I'm going to leave you with a wish list item for all of this, I want deadlines for install based on Apple release dates. I want them to close the deferral escape paths that we've discovered, which can be as simple as just restarting your system, because at that point it just discards the update and takes you back to scratch. Whee! That's fun. I want updates alerts to be triggered via MDM that should be customizable in time and persistence. I want install later should apply to major updates because I want the ability to say, hey, 12.2.1, get to 13.4. That would be rad. Do it tonight. Apple should take over the job of Nudge and Super and put them out of business. If you talk with an Apple person and you say, I am having to deploy a third-party tool because your stuff does not work the way that it needs to, that should be enough. We should not have to deploy third-party tools to keep our operating systems up to date. Windows admins don't have to put up with this. Why should we? Last but not least, I want them to spot problems that might result in a recovery mode trip during pre-flight and stop updates from happening. Thank you.